There are moments in life when the air seems to crackle, when something ordinary trembles on the edge of becoming unforgettable. And that's exactly what hung over the flight line that morning. A strange quiet tension woven through jet fumes and sunlight, as if the base itself sensed what was about to unfold. You could feel it before you understood it, the way your chest tightens just before lightning splits the sky, the way instinct whispers that the next minute might rewrite someone's future entirely. And if you've ever believed that arrogance has a way of exposing itself in the worst possible moment, then make sure to like and subscribe, because this story, this collision of pride, power, and a legend hiding in plain sight, is about to prove you right. The ceremony at Falcon Ridge Air National Guard Base was supposed to be a smooth, polished showcase for returning Guard members and the visiting governor's media tour, a clean-cut display of patriotism, pageantry, carefully staged interviews, and photo ops timed down to the second. Technicians were finishing maintenance checks, families gathered near the barricades, and uniformed escorts moved with rigid efficiency across the tarmac. But the quiet epicenter of the coming storm wasn't a politician, or a general, or a camera crew. It was a woman in her late 20s, dressed in a plain black tee, faded jeans, and a gray windbreaker, her hair tied back in a no-nonsense braid. Her name was Elena Ward, though most people here only knew her as a familiar face from the flight line, someone who worked around the aircraft, someone helpful, quiet, easy to overlook. No one would have guessed from her appearance that aviators whispered another name for her, a name only the few who truly understood her past ever dared to repeat: Iron Maiden. Elena wasn't here for attention. She wasn't here for recognition. She had come simply to support a few of her old unit friends returning from a grueling deployment. Men and women she'd sweated beside, bled beside, laughed with during long nights of wrench-turning under roaring engines. She moved through the hangar with the easy familiarity of someone who knew every echo, every oil stain, every temperamental panel of the A-10s parked proudly on display. And maybe that's why she didn't hesitate to step across the temporary rope line, an area technically restricted for VIP staging, but familiar enough to her that she didn't think twice. She didn't see the governor's staff forming up for his dramatic entrance. She didn't see the camera crew repositioning. She simply crossed the space to get a clearer view of the flight apron, unaware that her quiet, unassuming movement was about to collide with ego in its most polished form. Governor Dalton Briggs, in his tailored Navy suit and perfectly rehearsed grin, was a man who thrived on spectacle. He walked into the hangar flanked by security aides and public relations personnel, all of them buzzing around him like satellites orbiting a sun they were paid to admire. His voice boomed with the charm of someone who'd practiced sincerity in the mirror. And when his gaze swept past the hangar, he saw Elena, casually dressed, backpack over her shoulder, standing somewhere a civilian shouldn't be, and his stride shifted into a slow, dismissive swagger. I saw it unfold the way you watch a train inch toward a broken track, inevitable, horrifying, impossible to stop. The staff flagged her down, more out of habit than necessity, and the governor, sensing a chance for a small display of authority, changed his direction entirely. He approached with a politician's smile, broad, shiny, and absolutely empty. "Excuse me, miss," he said, lifting his chin with a theatrical politeness. "This area is for authorized personnel only. Tours for guests are outside the cordon." Elena paused, offering him the faintest, most respectful nod. "I'm here with the unit," she replied evenly, not defensive, not flustered, simply honest. But Governor Briggs wasn't listening. He was performing. A few reporters angled their cameras. That was all the encouragement he needed. "With the unit," he repeated with a chuckle he clearly expected people to join in on. "Right. And what do you do with the aircraft? Take pictures? Help with morale?" Elena blinked once, the only sign that his comment had hit its target. She didn't correct him. She didn't list her years as a crew chief or describe the dozens of missions she'd kept aircraft alive for. She simply said, "Just visiting, sir." The governor laughed, a loud, condescending sound that echoed through the hangar like a dropped wrench. "Well," he said, turning to the nearest camera with a grin, "I suppose everyone wants to feel close to the action, even the enthusiastic fans." A few staffers laughed awkwardly, sensing the tone he wanted. The hangar's atmosphere thickened, a mixture of quiet shock and tightening discomfort. Elena remained still, a calm island in the middle of his storm of ego. And then he made the mistake that would ruin him. He waved toward her backpack and said loud enough for the cameras to pick up. "What was your call sign, sweetheart? Something cute? Something like pigtails? Daycare? I know the real ones." He laughed again. Too loud, too proud, too sure of himself. Elena didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't look away. She only breathed in once, slow and controlled, before saying in the most composed tone imaginable, "Sir, with respect, you're making a mistake." The governor smirked like a man who believed he was invincible. "The only mistake is wandering someplace you don't belong," he said, stepping closer, gesturing for security to escort her out like she was a problem to be removed. And that's when Major Leland, passing by from the operations office, caught a glimpse of Elena's wrist as her windbreaker shifted. A tattoo partially visible beneath her sleeve. An A-10 silhouette. Steel wings. A date burned into memory for those who knew. The major froze, color draining from his face. His expression shifted from boredom to dawning horror as recognition slammed into him. And in that instant, before he sprinted off to alert the base commander, before the entire chain of command mobilized, before the governor's career imploded in real time, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Because Elena Ward, the woman the governor had just mocked, was not just a visitor, not just a former mechanic, not just a young woman in jeans. She was Iron Maiden, and she had earned a name no one with any sense would ever laugh at. Not then, not now, not ever. The moment Major Leland turned and bolted toward the command building, the hangar seemed to tilt, as if gravity itself had shifted around Elena Ward, though she continued to stand as still and controlled as a locked turbine. The governor, completely oblivious to the silent alarm he had just triggered, continued to smirk and preen for the cameras, chatting loudly with a reporter who was trying, unsuccessfully, to signal that something unusual was happening behind him. There's a certain kind of stillness that spreads through a military flight line when someone in the chain of command recognizes a ghost, a legend, walking in civilian clothes, and that stillness swept across the floor now, first in whispers, then in subtle, stunned glances. Airmen who had been prepping static displays began slowing, their movements hesitating in an odd, synchronized ripple, as if sensing that the moment before them was no longer ordinary. Word travels fast on a base, but real word, the kind that hits like a dropped wrench in a silent hangar, travels faster. By the time Major Leland barged into the operations office and demanded immediate contact with the adjutant general, shockwaves were already unfurling across briefing rooms, maintenance bays, and even the VIP tent outside. Officers glanced at each other with wide eyes. Enlisted personnel straightened unconsciously, as though preparing for a formal inspection. The governor's staff noticed none of it. Cameras kept rolling, capturing Governor Briggs chuckling at his own joke while Elena remained perfectly still, her expression unreadable, her hands tucked into the pockets of her windbreaker. Inside the command building, alarms of a different kind were sounding. Phones rang. Radios crackled. Someone sprinted down a hallway. A captain tripped over a rolling chair, trying to stand up too fast. And in the adjutant general's temporary office, a converted briefing room with state flags lining the back wall, Major Leland burst in, breathless, pale, and wildly out of protocol as he declared, "Sir, she's here. Iron Maiden is on the flight line. The governor, he's a sir, he's mocking her." There are moments that age a man instantly, and the adjutant general aged 5 years in 5 seconds. Not because Elena Ward was dangerous, but because the political disaster unfolding outside was already beyond anything he could contain quietly. He didn't ask Leland to repeat himself. He didn't ask for details. He reached for his blouse, snapped the buttons with rigid precision, and ordered 2 colonels to assemble a rapid escort to the hangar. A black SUV with general officer plates was already being warmed up by the time he stepped outside. The command driver didn't wait for instructions. He simply floored the accelerator toward the flight line. Back in the hangar, the governor was still smiling, still talking, still absolutely unaware of how loudly his arrogance was echoing. "We get all sorts of fans," he joked to the cameras. "People who want to feel like part of the action, take a few pictures, tell a story or two. Can't blame them." Elena didn't reply. Her silence wasn't fear or intimidation. It was restraint, the kind you learn in places where wrong words carry consequences. But her stillness drew eyes. A young airman near the barricade recognized her, his face going slack as he muttered something to his supervisor, who immediately stopped what he was doing to stare. Two maintainers elbowed each other, whispering urgently. Someone in the crowd pulled out their phone and began recording, not the governor, but her. The shift was subtle at first, but then a group of pilots near the static A-10 display caught sight of the tail end of her tattoo as she tucked her arm into her jacket. Every one of them froze. One pilot's lips parted in disbelief, a quiet, "Holy shit," escaping him before he could stop it. They had heard the stories. The crew chief who refused to evacuate during a remote strip attack, the woman who stayed with a burning aircraft while tracer fire tore through the night sky, the one whose actions had saved an A-10, its pilot, and the entire rescue operation. It was said she moved like iron. Unbreakable. Unshakable. A maiden forged in fire. Iron Maiden. That was the moment the black SUV rolled into the hangar. It didn't announce itself with sirens. It didn't need to. Its presence alone demanded silence, and silence obeyed. The governor finally paused mid-sentence, turning with a confused frown as the rear doors opened in perfect unison. Out stepped the adjutant general, his expression carved from stone, followed by two colonels and the base commander, none of them looking at the governor, all of them striding with unwavering purpose directly toward Elena Ward. The governor's smirk faltered. Cameras pivoted. Reporters straightened. Staffers exchanged nervous glances. Something irreversible was happening, and every instinct in the room understood it, even if the governor did not. The officers stopped 3 feet short of Elena. For a heartbeat, the entire world seemed to hold still. And then the adjutant general snapped his heels together and delivered a crisp, flawless salute, the kind reserved for battlefield legends and Medal of Honor recipients. Gasps rippled through the hangar. A wrench clattered from someone's hand in the far corner. Even the humming APU of a nearby jet sounded like it quieted. Elena returned the salute with effortless precision, her expression unchanged, though something in her eyes softened. Recognition, maybe, or a quiet weariness. The adjutant general spoke loud enough for reporters, staffers, and every airman in the hangar to hear. Technical Sergeant Elena Ward. Iron Maiden, it is an honor to have you on our flight line. The title hit the governor like a sandbag. His posture sagged. His eyes darted between the cameras and the officers, silently begging for someone to explain how he had just walked into his own political execution. But the explanation was spoken aloud for the entire world to hear. The base commander stepped forward, voice low but laden with reverence as he addressed Elena. Your actions on forward strip echo. Your refusal to abandon your aircraft and your pilot under hostile fire remain one of the most courageous feats in this unit's history. The colonels nodded. The pilots stared. The governor looked nauseated. Then came the moment that sealed everything. A reporter, trembling with stunned curiosity, asked softly, Iron Maiden, that's really you? Elena didn't boast, didn't smile, didn't even look at the governor. She simply said, Yes, ma'am, with the quiet dignity of someone who had faced far louder threats than a politician's mocking laugh. The hangar erupted, not in cheers, but in a profound, breathless silence of respect, the kind that falls when truth reveals itself more powerfully than any speech. And in that silence, Governor Dalton Briggs realized the cameras were no longer pointed at him. They were pointed at the woman he had just dismissed as a fan, the woman who had earned a name he should never have dared laugh at. Iron Maiden. If the revelation had cracked the atmosphere of the hangar open, what followed shattered it completely, sending fragments of tension and disbelief rippling through every witness as the truth settled over the flight line like a thunderstorm refusing to pass. Governor Dalton Briggs stood frozen, his polished confidence peeling away in layers as he watched the adjutant general, the base commander, and 2 full-bird colonels position themselves around Elena Ward with the unmistakable posture reserved for dignitaries and heroes, not elected officials preening for cameras, but warriors whose names carried weight in rooms where politics held no sway. The reporters, sensing the tectonic shift in narrative, closed in with renewed intensity, lenses turning, microphones reaching, not toward the governor but toward Elena, who remained calm and quietly composed at the center of everything, as though she were used to standing in the eye of a storm. The governor's staff, pale and frantic, scrambled to adjust his talking points, whispering frantically, tugging at sleeves, urging him to say something. Anything that might soften the blow of what looked increasingly like a career-defining catastrophe. But the man could barely speak. His lips parted, closed, parted again, as if the words he needed had evaporated in the presence of a truth too enormous to spin. And then, in the most poetic twist of irony, his own microphone, still clipped, still hot, captured the tiny, panicked tremor in his voice when he finally managed to brittle. "General, I wasn't aware." The adjutant general didn't even look at him. "Respect," he said sharply, "does not require awareness. It requires character." Those words sliced through the hangar with surgical precision. A few airmen exhaled in shock. Someone muttered, "Damn," under their breath. The governor flinched visibly. Cameras caught everything. Trying desperately to reclaim the moment, Governor Briggs moved toward Elena, forcing a stiff smile onto his face. "Technical Sergeant Ward," he began, reaching out a hand as though this were some minor misunderstanding he could resolve with charm alone. But Elena did not take his hand. She simply looked at him, her expression neutral, unflinching, and in that quiet refusal the entire hangar seemed to recognize a deeper truth. Power meant nothing without honor, and honor meant everything when wielded by someone who had earned it at the worst possible cost. The governor's hand hovered awkwardly in the air for several long, humiliating seconds before he dropped it, clearing his throat as though trying to collect himself. He opened his mouth to speak again, but a reporter cut him off with the question that would go viral before he even finished processing it. "Governor Briggs," she said, steady and merciless, "why were you mocking a decorated combat veteran on live stream?" The hangar erupted, not in noise, but in a sharp, electric silence, the kind that signals annihilation. Briggs stuttered, choked, tried to laugh it off, but nothing he said could wash away the footage already circulating across the state's media feeds. Him sneering, him smirking, him calling Elena a sweetheart, him tossing around patronizing jokes about fans and cute call signs. All while one of the most respected figures in the state's Air National Guard stood before him with the patience of someone who had survived much worse. The adjutant general stepped in then, addressing the room and the cameras, with his chin high and his voice unwavering. "For those unaware," he said, "Tech Sergeant Elena Ward, known to her unit as Iron Maiden, was responsible for saving Lieutenant Colton's life during the forward strip Echo attack 2 years ago. She remained with a burning aircraft while hostile fire impacted the area, refusing evacuation until rescue personnel arrived. Her actions prevented a catastrophic chain explosion that would have killed dozens." The weight of his words pressed down on every person watching. Even the pilots, men and women hardened by years of training in combat, looked at Elena as though seeing her for the first time. Her legend had become human again, right before their eyes, quietly breathing amid the wreckage of the governor's arrogance. Briggs took a step back. For the first time that morning, he seemed small. Not politically small, spiritually small, hollowed out by the contrast between who he pretended to be and who Elena actually was. His staff tried subtly guiding him out, but reporters blocked the exit, cameras firing in rapid bursts. He was cornered by his own hubris. Meanwhile, the base commander gently guided Elena toward the stage where the ceremony was supposed to begin. But now, the entire event had transformed. This was no longer a welcome home PR appearance. This was a reckoning. Elena initially tried to refuse the spotlight, shaking her head when the adjutant general asked her to say a few words. But he insisted, not for politics, not for image, but for every young airman watching who needed to see what quiet, unglamorous heroism looked like. And so she stepped up to the podium, adjusting the mic with steady hands. She didn't tell stories of her service. She didn't talk about fire or fear or the night she earned her name. Instead, she spoke of dignity, of how every person in uniform, no matter their rank or gender or background, deserved to be treated with respect. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried, across the hangar, across the base, across the live stream that had erupted into hundreds of thousands of viewers. She ended her short speech with a single sentence that would become the headline for every article written afterward. "You don't salute a uniform. You salute the sacrifice behind it." When she stepped down, the roar of applause was deafening. Not exaggerated, not coerced, Genuine. Bone deep. The governor did not clap. He slipped out the side door moments later, face pale, sweat beading along his temple as he disappeared into the SUV that whisked him away from the disaster he had created with his own pride. By afternoon, the footage of his mockery had gone viral statewide. By evening, it was national. By the next morning, his approval ratings were in freefall. Commentators questioned his judgment. Veterans groups demanded public accountability. Donors pulled funding. Investigations opened. And Elena? She didn't appear on any talk shows. She didn't give interviews. She didn't bask in the spotlight that had been forced onto her. She simply returned to her work, to her life, to the quiet strength that had defined her long before anyone had pointed a camera her way. But the base would remember. The state would remember. And the governor, whose career crumbled in the days that followed, would remember most of all the moment he laughed at a woman he thought was insignificant, only to discover she was Iron Maiden, the one person whose integrity was strong enough to break him without ever raising her voice. And with that, the story of the governor's downfall was sealed, not by fury or vengeance or spectacle, but by the unshakable weight of a truth he never bothered to see until it crushed him completely.